inhabitants of peach trees.
This is Judge Dredd.
Law is not the law.
I am the law. America is an irradiated wasteland. Within it lies a city. Outside the boundary walls, a desert. The cursed earth. Inside the walls, the cursed city, stretching from Boston to Washington, D.C. 800 million people living in the ruin of the old world and the megastructures of the new one. Mega blocks, mega highways, Mega City 1. Convulsing, choking, breaking under its own weight. Citizens in fear of the street, the gun, the gang. Only one thing fighting for order in the chaos. The men and women of the Hall of Justice. Juries. Executioners. Judges.
This is Mama. Somewhere in this block are 2 judges. I want him dead. Until I get what I want, the block is locked down.
Lockdown complete.
Ready?
Yeah.
You look ready. Pirates.
There's 10 of us. Only 2 of you.
10 seconds to comply.
You got 5.
Thanks for the heads up.
On the 11th of July 2012, Dredd was given its premiere at the San Diego Comic-Con. A few months later it arrived in the UK on the 7th of September, and on the 20th in the USA. It was rated an 18 in the UK and hit the #1 spot at the box office, but its success was short-lived, and its release in the USA was met with poor marketing and distribution, and it struggled to find an audience. Many fans of 2000 AD and the character of Judge Dredd in the United States had to travel miles to get to see the film, even in its 2D presentation. Dredd arrived at the time when 3D was the dominating quick cash grab due to the huge success of Avatar. 3D was the latest gimmick, and not everyone was a fan of it. Most adults tended to ignore the 3D presentations, wanting to see it in 2D, but for its UK and USA distribution, more 3D shows were put on rather than 2D, further limiting its chance for success. This may have also been a similar occurrence across Europe. The movie was an independent production, costing a very modest $45 million, and unfortunately only managed to make back $41 million worldwide. It crawled in a further $20 million for the DVD and Blu-ray market, but it wasn't enough to consider the movie a success. Despite its failings at the box office, it was met with great reviews. Fans of the comic book loved it, and the co-creator of Dredd, John Wagner, said he enjoyed the film. To many fans of the character, it washed out the bad taste of the Stallone film Judge Dredd from 1995, which didn't help the reputation of the comic book character, and put off producers for many years to bring him back to the big screen. The 1990s were a boom time for comic book movies. After the success of Batman in 1989, many film studios were optioning many comic books to be adapted to film, but the majority were unsuccessful. They were handled by filmmakers who didn't understand the source material, and the 1995 Judge Dredd film was no exception. As a young teenager, I was pumped to see it, but I was a bit too young to see it in theatres. When I got the chance 6 months later, I was disappointed like many readers of 2000 AD. The film falls apart just after 10 minutes or so when Dredd removes his helmet and doesn't wear it again until the third act, but only for a brief moment. While Sylvester Stallone was enjoying his second wave of success at the box office, he had a few flops in the early 90s and came back with Cliffhanger, which was a big success. His ego came out in full force. He wasn't going to have his face covered up throughout. He is a big star, he can't have that. The creators of DREDD were not consulted on the project. The movie was tailored to include more comedy, with DREDD getting a sidekick at one point with a computer expert and fraudster played by Rob Schneider. The film kind of looks the part, it has visual elements to match the comics, but everything underneath is deeply flawed. It was nothing like the comics, and just another action vehicle for Stallone that just so happens to have the Judge Dredd name slapped on it, and a few visual cues to trick the audience. The film wasn't a success and was panned by critics, and didn't do 2000 AD any favours. It boosted sales before the film came out, but the character of Dredd had been tainted afterwards by the movie. It took a while for people to disassociate the comic book character from the film. The script for the new DREDD film had started back in 2006 by writer Alex Garland, who penned the scripts for 28 Days Later and Sunshine. Garland was a big fan of Judge Dredd and 2000 AD since he was a kid, and his early draft revolved around one of Dredd's popular villains, Judge Death, but he scrapped that idea because it relied too much on the audience to be knowledgeable of the Judge system, and he needed to establish the world before he introduced Judge Death to tear it apart. Garland decided that the story needed to be more focused and grounded, and favoured a shorter day-in-the-life story about Dredd and his function as a cop in this dystopian future. As Garland was also operating as a producer, the development of the film commenced in December of 2008, and over the next 2 years secured funding from the British studio DNA Films and IM Global. With the funding in place, a decision was made to shoot it in 3D, which at the time was the latest gimmick to gain extra profits. Many films were being shot in 3D, or in some cases being post-converted. The success of Avatar made it a very enticing option to boost profits. By May 2010, and with a budget of $45 million in place, they scheduled to begin filming in Johannesburg, South Africa in late 2010. Making use of Cape Town studios, the UK even played a small part, as a shopping mall was used in Greater London, which has now been demolished, but it doubled for the opening sequence of Dredd stopping a criminal. During the early stages, Duncan Jones had been offered the role of director. Duncan was a big fan of 2000 AD, but sadly turned the job down, feeling his vision for the film was unconventional, describing it as weird, dark and funny, and he felt Garland's script didn't reflect that. In stepped Pete Travis, who started out his career directing TV shows, such as Cold Feet and The Jury. He jumped onto feature films with Vantage Point and Endgame. Co-creator of Judge Dredd, John Wagner, was consulted during the film's production, unlike the 1995 film, and suggested that the future portrayed in Dredd should relate to modern ways of living, so what you see in the movie doesn't seem that far-fetched, and successfully captures a sense of believability. And the majority of it being set in a tower block, that direction was essential. Throughout the production, Garland would send his script to Wagner, who would revise some of the dialogue to make sure in particular what Dredd said seemed faithful to the character, in keeping with the idea of having the artists who worked on 2000 AD, an artist by the name of Jock, had translated the script and storyboarded it into a comic book, and also contributed to the concept designs, to help in particular the visual effects artists in creating the CGI elements that needed to be designed and added to the movie. Judge Dredd takes on a new look in the film, but it doesn't deviate too far from his original design. The filmmakers decided that Dredd should appear lean and fast, rather than the bulky look depicted in the comics. Dredd has been drawn by many artists throughout the years, so changes are common. His judge uniform was altered, the extruded eagle statuette was removed from his shoulder pad to emphasise the outfit's functionality, and he received more padding and body armour to protect him in battle. And of course, Dredd never removes his helmet. His mouth is only visible, a simple lesson the 1995 film struggled with. Dredd's signature weapon, the Lawgiver, was developed as a fully operational weapon based on a 9mm firing system, capable of firing ammunition, and like the comics is loaded with different types of ammo, which is displayed on the gun, but are only achieved with digital effects. Thankfully, no double whammy.
Double whammy. Double whammy.
His motorcycle, the Lawmaster, was a modified 500cc motorcycle. A large fairing was added over the motorbike, with added machine guns and given the largest functional tyres possible, to capture the look of the comics. On the 7th of October 2011, it was reported in the LA Times and a number of articles online that the director Pete Travis was prohibited from participating in the editing process following creative disagreements between the producers and executives. They disapproved over the footage that Travis was providing. Garland took over the editing process. Because of his large involvement, he could have been entitled to a co-director credit. His contribution was considered significant enough for him to seek that credit, despite not being in charge of any filming. Although Travis was removed from the editing process, he was monitoring the progress of the film. A few days later, it was reported that Travis was still involved in the movie, and that Garland was not seeking a co-director credit. This may indicate why no audio commentary was produced for the DVD and Blu-ray release, due to the disagreements on the production, and Travis wasn't featured in the behind-the-scenes material, and was only interviewed for a couple of press junkets. For the cast of Dredd, we have the always reliable Karl Urban, playing the famous and feared Judge Dredd. Karl approached the producers about playing the character, and with him already being a star and a well-known actor for his roles in Lord of the Rings and Star Trek, he gave the movie bankability and got the part. Karl found the role challenging. He had to wear his mask throughout the film and had to use a lot of body language to sell the part. Karl did a lot of preparation for the role and underwent weapons training, and he even performed his own motorcycle stunts. He did struggle with the harsh vocal tone he has to use for his character. He found it hard to sustain the voice throughout the long takes. Lena Headey plays the drug lord Mama. She is a former prostitute who turned to a life of crime and rose to the top in the criminal underworld, and is the sole supplier of the new drug called slow-mo. Mama, as far as I'm aware, is not from the comics and was created for the film. Lena based her performance on the punk rock singer Patti Smith. I believe Mama was originally going to be a larger woman before Lena was cast. The early previous effects show a very big lady. Olivia Thirlby plays Judge Cassandra Anderson, who has just started out her career as a judge and is a mutant. She has psychic powers and can read people's minds and emotions, but she can't wear her helmet as it affects her abilities. Olivia undertook weapons training and also martial arts. Judge Anderson is from the comics and made her debut in 1980 along with Judge Death. Wood Harris plays Kay, one of Mama's henchmen. He gets arrested early on in a drugs bust in Peach Trees. As the judges attempt to take him back for interrogation, Mama locks them in as she doesn't want Kay to reveal the production of slow-mo. Kay feels he is no worse than the judges and feels justified in what he does, and tries to think of ways to escape, but struggles under Anderson's mind-reading abilities. Finally, we have Domhnall Gleeson, who starred in the Harry Potter films The Revenant and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Domhnall's character is not given a name, and his responsibility is to keep the security in check at Peach Trees, and is a computer expert. He has been tortured by Mama and had his eyes replaced with bionic ones, which I believe is a reference to the City of the Damned storyline from the mid-80s, in which Dredd is blinded and gets bionic eyes, and he has had them ever since. The movie opens in the future, where the world has been turned into a wasteland and has been named the Cursed Earth. Set on the east coast of the United States, a city by the name of Mega City 1 is a violent and overpopulated metropolis, with 17,000 crimes reported on a daily basis. To combat crime, the police force has put in place judges, who have the power to be a judge, jury and executioner. It seems to be set in the early days of Dredd, probably around the year 2099. It's now 2139 in the comics. Judge Dredd ages in real time, so he's about 73 years old now. Judge Dredd, who after dealing with a local crime is called into the Hall of Justice to evaluate a new recruit called Anderson, who has psychic abilities, but she failed her aptitude test. But Dredd's superior believes she has potential and sends her out with Dredd on her first assignment. Dredd and Anderson get a call to visit Peach Trees, which is a 200-story slum tower block run by the drug lord Mama. 3 drug dealers have been skinned alive and dropped from the top floor while intoxicated with slow-mo, a new addictive drug that has infested the city. Upon inspection and the arrest of one of Mama's important dealers, she decides to seal the tower block to stop the judges from escaping or summoning help. She tells the inhabitants of Peach Trees to kill the judges. Dredd and Anderson have to fight their way through dozens of armed thugs. Arriving at the 76th floor, the judges are spotted by Mama and her men. She unleashes a heavy wave of gunfire that cuts through the walls, Dredd and Anderson make a run for it, narrowly avoiding being shot. Dredd breaches an outer wall and manages to call for backup. Meanwhile, Mama has sent out her henchman Caleb to search for the judges, hoping to find their remains. Dredd spots him and he is not to be messed with, and throws Caleb off the tower in full view of Mama to show he is not going to back down. Kay manages to escape and takes Anderson hostage. Mama needs to get rid of Dredd quickly and calls in backup. She contacts 4 corrupt judges who will take out Dredd for 1 million credits. Dredd is now in trouble, alone and running seriously low on ammunition. For a film with a relatively small budget, the visual effects looked great when it came out. With CGI becoming more affordable, it makes it easier for films with lower budgets to compete with the big blockbusters. But also with the lower costs, it oftentimes makes filmmakers abuse the technology, like the early adopters in the 90s. And in some cases, CGI ends up looking unrealistic and dated even for its time. Thankfully with Dredd, the director and the FX team make great efforts to combine live action material with the CG elements. Johannesburg had a lot of brutalist 70s architecture, which was a perfect backdrop for Megacity 1. They could shoot clean plates and then apply large motorways and tower blocks, and in some cases hardly adding much at all. For example, just throwing in a tower block in the foreground and a few into the background. For the interior of Peachtrees, they built 3 floors, which was a quarter of the final design, and they would redress the set and shoot it from different angles to make it appear as a different floor, and used CGI to extend the set so it appears to have 200 levels. The FX supervisor John Thumb developed the slow-mo sequences with creative input from writer Alex Garland. They used a camera that would shoot at 3000 frames per second, so you capture every moment so clearly when played back at 24 frames per second. When Dredd bursts through the door and you see the kickback of the explosion hit the drug dealers, you see the ripple effect on their skin, which was a simple technique of shooting compressed air onto them. For the effects of the blood splattering out of their wounds and hitting the screen, they did tests with fake blood bags, and shooting at 3000 frames per second, you get this wonderful effect. When they chose to shoot in 3D, they knew it would take up a large chunk of the budget, and you had to follow certain rules to make the image appear in 3D. If the wrong angles were chosen or particular camera moves, the 3D effect wouldn't be very impressive. The DP didn't want to rely on it to push the regular gimmick that came along with the format. He wanted to break away from the rules, which could be seen as risky, and wanted to focus on the depth of the image that gave the audience something more than just a regular 3D movie. Now, I never saw the movie in 3D and only opted for the 2D showings, but the feedback from 3D shows were generally positive. The slow-mo effects in particular worked well with audiences. The best stuff for me really is the city landscapes and how they added to the material to create a believable world. By just adding buildings and motorways, it's a complicated and skilled process, but simple in theory, to create a world of the future that doesn't seem too far away. Paul Leonard Morgan composed a score to Dredd. It's very much an unconventional score that doesn't rely on big themes or bombastic orchestral pieces. Paul took inspiration from John Carpenter, going with that 80s synthesizer sound, even using the old keyboards, and combining more modern sound techniques to create this distorted sound for the picture. Paul was looking to create a timeless score that couldn't be placed in a particular era. For the slow-mo sequences, Paul composed a different style of music and slowed it down by thousands of a percent to match the visuals, and then composed music and played it at a normal speed and mixed the tracks together. As you can tell, it's all very experimental and an original approach, but for me it's not my cup of tea. I found it a bit of a jarring experience, and if you listen to the soundtrack isolated with its CD release, I found it tough to listen to, way too noisy, and it felt unfocused. The best stuff for me is the opening music, which has this simple deep bass line that sets the tone. The atmospheric moments for the slow-mo sequences, the scenes where Dredd and Anderson breach the outer wall, and when Dredd takes out Mama and drops her off the top floor. These, I believe, were the best parts of the score. The composer certainly did something totally different to what Alan Silvestri did for the 1995 film, and if you swap the music from the movies, it's hard to imagine Silvestri's music working with the new one, but I think a solid theme tune should have been created for Dredd to give him a new musical voice for his return to the big screen. You can easily get the soundtrack on iTunes or CD. Also, if you listen carefully during the early scenes with Domhnall Gleeson, you can hear he is listening to the song featured in the TV show Snuffbox, performed by Matt Berry. Due to the failure of the film, a sequel seemed to be off the cards. Fans wanted to see more, and Karl Urban was happy to return due to his love for the character. But it's hard for studios and financial backers to invest in a film that's not going to make them any returns and end up being a loss. It's the nature of the business. There have been, of course, endless articles and clickbait news posts that have hinted that a sequel is going to happen, or possibly a Netflix or Amazon Prime series, which I truly think is the best way to go. A film is limited by its runtime, whereas a 10-episode series could really expand the world of DREDD and throw in more characters from the comics. The character of DREDD has never hit the mainstream, especially in the USA, which is a market they would love to capture, but DREDD has always satirised America. That's probably why it hasn't gelled well with the masses. To truly understand how the film was financed and the possibility of seeing more films, I'd recommend watching Adi Shankar's video, who was an executive producer on the film and makes it very clear on why a sequel is not in the works. This video was produced a couple of years ago, but is still very much relevant. With 2000 AD being a British publication, the DREDD movie was very much pushed in the UK. It was a movie I was aware that was coming out, and I was more than happy to see another take on the character, and from the early trailers the filmmakers seemed to be going in the right direction. It felt faithful, and the 18 rating put a big smile on my face. With it being an independent production, it doesn't feel like a big studio picture. There seems to be a great sense of freedom, feeling like a movie from the 80s. It doesn't hold back on the violence, it's nice and gory, but certainly not as extreme as, say, Robocop, which borrowed heavily from Judge Dredd. All the classic lines such as "come quietly" or "there will be trouble" or "you have 10 seconds to comply" all come from DREDD. With its rating, it was good to see a comic book movie that knows who its audience is and isn't trying to please a younger demographic. Its lower budget certainly helped with that decision. The higher the budget, the rating is often lower to avoid any risk of losses. Straight out the gate, the movie sets up the rules and who the judges are. It informs the audience in a very simple and concise manner, so you feel well informed without having to sit through 30 minutes of backstory. Alex Garland's idea to show you a day in the life of DREDD was a clever move to appeal to a wider audience who didn't have much knowledge of the character or had no idea who he was. When I first saw it, and still to this day, it feels like it belongs in the same universe as District 9. I suppose with both movies being shot in South Africa, it gives off a very similar vibe, and the use of technology feels familiar. DREDD was criticised at the time for feeling like a carbon copy of the Raid, which arrived the year before. At face value, it may come across as a bit of a knockoff, and I believe it's only a coincidence. DREDD was written a number of years before the Raid turned up, but it must have frustrated the filmmakers of DREDD when they saw the Raid and knew comparisons would be made. The comics of Judge Dredd are very much heavy on satire, with it being a comment on American society and politics. Dredd is an extreme right-wing character and is all about the law, but the movie doesn't have any political agendas or attempts to make bold statements on society. As far as I'm aware, there is a sense of anti-establishment. There may be other themes deep within it that I may have not noticed, but instead it plays it safe and keeps it simple. It appears to stick to the early days of Judge Dredd, a cop in the future who has the ability to pass judgment on the individuals he arrests, and with the overpopulation he can put you in prison with a harsh sentence or kill you on the spot. If there were stronger elements of satire, it could have pushed a greater sense of humour to it. The film is not devoid of moments of comedy. Dredd has a very dry sense of humour when he quizzes Anderson on why she doesn't wear a helmet, and his reply to her when she believes Kay is going to go for his gun as she reads his mind. I think if Dredd didn't have a bit of humour to him, he wouldn't seem very dynamic or interesting. If he was just barking out the law to criminals, it wouldn't be entertaining for a feature-length movie. You want the audience to care about him and his mission, and thankfully you do. Due to Karl Urban's solid performance and the writing, it shows great consideration for his character, but teaming up with Anderson gives him moments of being more human and less of the strict, emotionless judge he may appear at face value. She makes him understand the deeper elements of judging people, instead of jumping to conclusions with the release of the computer expert due to reading his mind and discovering the pain and torture he's been put through makes DREDD question her motives. She argues her case and DREDD shows signs of an understanding and going against the rules which he is so obsessed with following. It was a good move not to have Anderson be played as a love interest. The filmmakers don't try to push some deep friendship between her and DREDD. DREDD is not out to be her friend and is only concerned if she can do her job. There are many moments where he just looks at her like he is reviewing her performance at all times. Once she is injured and they get rid of Mama, he comes to her aid, and despite her failing her duties and breaking the rules, which is punishable, he gives her a pass to make her a full judge, which shows a nice story arc for him and a new element of his character. It shows that he is not totally void of sympathy and shows an understanding that the rules may not always apply to every situation. It's a shame they didn't have more characters from the comics or a villain that was part of DREDD's history. I'm not saying someone like Judge Death, this would be a bit early for him to be introduced and is best left for a sequel, but someone to match DREDD in strength. Mama was made up for the film and Lena does a great job portraying this damaged woman, but just facing up against a drug lord is not entirely original or interesting to a large extent. The character is written well, but I'm sure fans of the comic probably thought of a list of other characters that could have made an appearance. The movie whips along at a quick pace. It's only just over 90 minutes long, which is surprisingly short for a comic book adaptation. Most clock in at around 2 hours at minimum nowadays. I suppose with the story they are trying to tell, it wouldn't necessarily justify a 2-hour runtime, but more could have been done to explore the characters. But I suppose as it's trying to please a wider audience, it doesn't want to bog itself down with the deeper themes and storylines from the comics. It's a tough juggling act to balance what is needed for both fans and the general public. With its 90-minute runtime, it does make the movie very rewatchable. It's straightforward and simple to follow, so you can just slap it on and not have to worry about putting loads of time aside and having to be heavily invested in it. It's just pure entertainment that should appeal to everyone. Carl Urban, despite not having the big chin that the comic book version of DREDD has, does a wonderful job portraying the character. He very much makes the character his own. It's hard for an actor to bring out their performance when most of their face is covered up. It's a challenge and not everyone can do it. Not having his face revealed is a daring move, but an important one in staying true to the character, and it shows he respects the source material. I think everyone involved in the cast does a fine job with their performances. Everyone seemed believable in their roles, and you feel invested in what is a simple story. The action is nicely executed and edited. The photography makes the movie really pop and stand out, with its heavy use of primary colours. Despite its gritty, dark and realistic approach to its storytelling and design, it's surprisingly colourful. If DREDD is not part of your collection, then you should seriously consider buying it as soon as possible. It's a straightforward action flick that treats the source material with respect and should hopefully encourage newcomers to invest in the comics and seek out some of the classic stories of Judge Dredd. He has been going for 40 years now, so there is a rich history to explore. It's a shame the film was let down by its marketing and focus on 3D showings, alienating a large chunk of the audience, but I hope there is something in the foreseeable future that brings DREDD back into the limelight, so this version of DREDD continues and we can see more of Mega City 1 and watch Judge Dredd crush his enemies with a brutal slice of the law.
We have her on record from her whoring days. The picture's pretty old, but that's her. Madeline Madrigal, aka Mama, ex-hooker from the S9 Pleasure District. Her trademark is violence. Not so long ago, there were 3 main gangs hustling for control of peace trees. The Peyote Kings, the Red Dragons, the Judged. Then Mama arrived. Took over the top floor of the block and started working her way down. 9 months later, she had control of everything. Levels 1 to 200. All hers.
How'd she get away with it?
You know how often we get a judge up in peace trees?
Well, you got one now.
Hunt the judges down.
Incendiary.
have a problem with the judge. You know who he is?
No.
I do.
No way out, Judge.
This isn't a negotiation. The sentence is death.
If you enjoyed the video, you can find more on my YouTube channel, and also you can follow me on Twitter. If you want to help support the channel, you can donate through Patreon and receive monthly perks such as updates on the latest news on my channel, early access to reviews and commentaries before they go live on YouTube. Even the smallest donation can help keep this channel going. Thank you.